guess for those who can't hear me really, so I'm inviting you basically into my notebook. And it's not a PowerPoint, as you can see. It's an old-fashioned Word document. So I'll start to read and let's see how much time I have or what we can do. Now I'm even more distant. So my title is Abhinivesha. Maybe you can come closer. No, I'm serious. Maybe some of you who can't hear me can come closer. So my title is Abhinivesha, Patanjali Yoga on Life and Death. The question I'm suggesting, what happens after death, whether there is some continuation, existence, afterlife, heaven or hell, punarjanam, is an open question. I once had the occasion to participate in a Q&A session with Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, the acclaimed Thai ascetic philosopher. A definition which I found on his Wikipedia page, what's one more? Thailand. What happens after death? Asking a woman in the audience. I have no idea. He answered with a smile. I'm not dead yet. It was a verbal abhaya mudra, a gentle stop sign. Like the Buddha of old with regard to the so-called avyakta questions, Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu preferred, thus proving to be more ascetic than philosopher, to focus on the practical instead of the speculative, on suffering and the release from it instead of maha-philosophical questions. But the Dalai Lama declares that he's the 14th incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, insisted the questioner. And if this is the case, then death cannot be the end. He's a wise man, Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu answered, and surely knows what he's talking about. Everyone laughed. The question remained open. The same question is famously raised and discussed in the Kathaka Upanishad. Nachiketa's young and full of Shraddha, special clarity, which perhaps fades as one grows up, wants to know what happens after death, and who can be a better informant than Yama, death himself. Unlike Savitri and Yudhishthira of the Mahabharata, who had a close encounter with death, in Yudhishthira's case, I think of the famous Yaksha Prashna episode, for the sake of reviving their dead, Nachiketa wants to know. He's a Vividishu, seeker of knowledge. There is doubt about a man who is dead, he tells Yama. He exists, says some. Others, he exists not. I want to know this, so please teach me. I'm using Patrick Oliver's translation. Yama tries to bribe him away from his penetrative question. He offers him longevity and wealth, and even women. In brackets I wrote, isn't Nachiketa too young to be observed? Here are noble maidens. Radha Krishnan translates moralistically. I lost them. With chariots and musical instruments, the like of them cannot be won by men. Be served by these whom I give to thee, O Nachiketas. Pray ask not about them. Ramaha is the translated as noble maidens. Nachiketas rejects this indecent proposal and insists on receiving an answer. Do not press me, Yama begs him. Release me from this. Such is the power of Vividisha. It is death who asks Nachiketa to be released by him, and not vice versa. Yama's attempt to distract Nachiketa from his target reminds me of the last temptation of the yogi on his way to Kaivalya, depicted in Yoga Sutra 352. It was mentioned yesterday in the last presentation. If invited by higher beings, or dwellers of celestial regions, sthanis, neither pride nor desire should arise in the yogi, lest unwanted attachments recur. Vyasa in his commentary imagines the precise content of such an invitation. I quote a few lines of this fantastic account in Jeffrey Mason's fantastical translation, tailor-made for his paper Yogic Powers and Simple Formation, in which Patanjali and Vyasa, or more precisely their texts, are stretched out on the psychoanalyst's couch. Hello, come and enjoy yourself here. This is a lovely place, and this young woman is beautiful. Here is a magic potion that will counteract the effects of old age and death. And here is a carriage that flies through the air. Here are trees that fulfill all your wishes. Here is the holy Mandakini river. Here are great sages who have all attended magic powers. Now it corresponds to the third chapter, the Siddhis. Your hearing and your vision will become supernatural. Your body will become like a diamond. All this you have earned by your very own merits. Stay in this place, for it is deathless. It is indestructible. There is no old age here, and the gods themselves love it. This is the last temptation of the yogi in chapter 3 of the Yoga Sutra. Chapter 4, in brackets I wrote, the sequence of the chapters and the status of chapter 4 is a question for a separate discussion, which Gerard Larson was supposed to speak of. So chapter 4 introduces the last temptation of its own. Sutra 429 implies that in the last few yards before Kaivalya, as his finish line, the yogin, or the brahmana, the brahmin, in Vyasa's formulation, needs to renounce or to become uninterested, akusidaha, in prasankyana, or as Swami Harananda Aranya glosses, omniscience. You have a mic for me? Omniscience. Here the temptation to be overcome is knowledge. It is neither sensual temptation as in chapter 3 in the Kathaka Upanishad, nor temptation raised by any outer source, such as Yama or Vyasa's higher beings. It is rather inner temptation. The yogi is requested to sacrifice his own knowledge. Or in a treatise which opens with a phrase such as Yogaschita Vritti Nirodha, knowledge as such. Knowledge is a powerful temptation, as the biblical myth about the tree of knowledge, Etz Hadat, in Genesis chapter 2 also indicates. In reply to Nachiketa's uncompromised question, Yama tells him and us that the good and the pleasant are two different things. The dhira, or wise, is capable of making a distinction between shreyas and preyas, between the good and the pleasant. The manda, or fool, owing to yoga kshema, which according to Shankara is the inclination of preserving the body, etc., shariradi, opts for prayas. The famous Advaitin, or non-dualist, Shankara, makes a clear-cut dualistic distinction between the body and the Atma. For him, Atma Vidya, Atma knowledge, or knowing oneself as the Atma, can only occur when one's erroneous but natural, naisargika identification with the body ceases. Apropos the good and the pleasant as the Atma versus the body in Shankara's formulation, I recall Pandit Badrinath Shukla's Shata Shloki, a contemporary treatise rooted in the Nyaya tradition. Here the counter Shankarite Shukla writes, in English translation I'm reading to you, there have been a number of sages, rishis, in this land of Bharat, India, but they never desired disembodied emancipation. I'm reading slowly so you can read the Sanskrit. As against Shankara's position, Shukla pleads for enlightened action in the world by the mukta, the emancipated. To act in the world one needs a body. For Shukla, the body is a useful tool, not a useless appendage, upajana. According to Shankara, Nachiketa says flat rejection of prayas, namely the body, etc., is in fact his initiation into shreyas, here in the sense of immortality. For him, immortality is embedded in vairagya, this passion toward everything belonging to the category of prayas. For that Krishna, another contemporary counter-Shankarite thinker, immortality is just an illusion. According to him, I work with his intriguingly titled paper, Bondages of Birth and Death, Emerging Technologies of Freedom, on the horizon and the hope of final release from the fundamental bondage of humankind. This is a short title relatively for Daniel Krishna. So in his paper he says that freedom is not about immortality, but about sobering up from the illusion of immortality. totality. Moreover, for Daya Krishna, endowed with an Nachiketa-like Shraddha, the lack of a definite answer to the question of life and death, apropos the question which was just raised here, what is Kaivalya, and identify with the mixed response. So for Daya Krishna, the lack of a definite answer to the question of life and death, or any other perennial philosophical question, is not necessarily a sign of failure. For him, it is the question, always the question, not the answer, which facilitates at least a quantum of freedom. One may argue, with regard to my initial premise, namely that the after-death question is open, that for the author of the Yoga Sutra, it is not really the case. On the contrary, the answer seems clear. After death, one is reborn according to the workings of karma, and moreover, a yogi immersed in aparigraha, non-possessiveness, as Patanjali writes in Yoga Sutra 239, knows the why and how, the katamta, of previous and future births. However, it is the fear of death, in the fear of death, maranatrasa, or the burning desire not to cease, emphasized by Vyasa in his gloss of the notion of Abhinivesha, grasping on to life, and shared according to him by learned men and worms just born. I see the inescapable question mark with regard to that which is after the end of time, after time. In the following paragraphs, I intend to delve deeper into Patanjali Yoga of the notion of Abhinivesha. I'm not sure that my investigation will clear Nachiketa's doubt, Nachiketa, about existence or not after death, but it will enable us to learn something about the yoga psychology. For Patanjali, human consciousness is made of two layers, mental and psychological. The mental faculty on the surface consists of the modifications, or vrittis, which he discusses in chapter 1 of his famous treatise. Underlying the mental faculty is the psychological substratum, which the Sutrakara refers to using the notions of klesha, vasana, and sanskara, which Chris just referred to. The former, relevant for my forthcoming Abhinivesha discussion, pertains to psychological patterns or defaults, which determine one's phenomenal persona. Vasanas and sanskaras are hidden memories which ordinary memory cannot register, but which are nevertheless collected and stored unconsciously, to be later aroused, effective, and even determinative in one's phenomenal aspects of being. The two layers of consciousness, the mental and the psychological, are portrayed by Patanjali and his commentators as corresponding with one another. In Yoga Sutra Bhashya 1.5, Vyasa speaks of vritti sanskara chakra manisham, or perpetually revolving wheel of vrittis and sanskaras, constantly feeding one another. Implied is a picture of the human consciousness as a replica-based mechanism. At every worldly encounter, one replicates previous such encounters or experiences. The human person is defined by inner patterns, which are in turn reinforced by every vritti or action. In Yoga Sutra Bhashya 2.13, Vyasa compares the mind to a fishing net. Matsya jala, I don't know if you know this metaphor, made of vasanas, which come into being as a result of the activity of the kleshas. The fishing net metaphor suggests that the fishy, external world is captured only through inner patterns or knots, which is quite depressing compared to the positive presentations that you heard in the last 2 days. In chapter 2 of the Yoga Sutra, under the heading of Kriya Yoga, practical yoga, Patanjali enumerates 5 kleshas: Avidya, the phenomenal gaze; Asmita, eccentricity; Raga, attraction; Vesha, aversion; and Abhinivesha. Avidya is portrayed as the field or the breeding ground of all other kleshas. Patanjali's discussion of the notion of Avidya is both epistemological and psychological. The epistemological dimension of this mula klesha, namely Avidya, is no distinction between the altogether distinct from one another Purusha and Prakriti, is conveyed in Sutras 2.5 and 2.24. The psychological dimension, which I want to focus on in Yoga Sutra 2.15. Here Patanjali writes that, owing to the suffering inherent in change, in pain, tapas, in the ripening of sanskaras, in the strife of the fluctuating gunas, all is suffering for the discerning, for the viveking, all is suffering for the discerning. Avidya is projected via negativa as sheer blindness to the constant movement of the gunas, and to the potent presence of sanskaras and vasanas under the allegedly solid facade of phenomenal reality. To see Prakriti as she really is to become aware of the forces which bubble under the surface. In his gloss of 215, Yoga Sutra 215, Vyasa offers an explanatory definition of his own to the notion of Avidya. According to him, Avidya, I translated before as the phenomenal gaze, the way I see you now in his Sugya. This is called Avidya. So according to Vyasa, Avidya is the enjoyment of objects. Vishaya Sukham. He says enjoyment of objects, Vishaya Sukham, is called Avidya. This is to say that Avidya signifies a pattern of involvement in the world through what is commonly considered as enjoyment or pleasure, Sukha. It is the short-termness of mundane pleasure and its dependence upon objects, the commentators from Vyasa onwards explain, which makes it erroneous from a yogic point of view. Drawing on Bhagavad Gita 1838, Abhinivesha speaks of the pleasure that one feels when eating food mixed with sweet poison. It is merely the yogin, or the vivekin, as Patanjali refers to him, far more sensitive than the common man, like the eye compared to every other bodily organ, as Vyasa beautifully puts it, that notices the sweet poison inherent in every phenomenal occurrence. In the same Bhashya, Vyasa employs yet another powerful metaphor to emphasize the vanity of seeking pleasure as the remedy for the pains of mundane existence. According to him, a seeker of pleasures is like a person who runs away from the sting of a scorpion, only to be bitten by a snake. Only to be bitten by a snake. Where's the snake? Here's the snake. The notion of Avidya, it is implied here, pertains not just to certain blindness and its painful consequences, but to an uncontrolled inner tendency toward objects and externality. In this respect, Avidya is not merely a cognitive error to be corrected cognitively, as in the Sankhya formulation. The deeply rooted tendency of externality, which is the actual cause of pain, has to be worked with. We have reached an alternative definition of Avidya, derived from Vyasa's definition. Avidya is the tendency toward externality. Avidya is the tendency toward externality. The question is how to deal with this tendency, with tendencies or inner dispositions at large, which phenomenalize and unfree us. But in order to deal with them, to work with them, to neutralize their toxic effectiveness, one first has to reach them, to cut through the mental faculty and arrive at the underlying psychological surface. This can be done, Patanjali explains, through meditation. In Yoga Sutra 118, for example, he writes that in the other type of samadhi, namely asampragyata, achieved through repetitive practice, abhyasa of cessation of mental activity, only the sanskaras remain. Freud is famous for suggesting that the interpretation of dreams is the royal road to a knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind. Dreams are not as crucial in Patanjali's formulation. For him, it is in fact certain meditative procedure which is the royal road to the unconscious. In asampragyata samadhi, mental activity is suspended and one obtains direct access to his sanskara shesha, or karmic residue, equivalent in my reading to Freud's unconscious. But our focus is the kleshas from Avidya to Abhinivesha, and the question is how to get access to and how to dismantle the effect of the kleshas, literally causes of affliction, which work as inner obstacles on the yogin's path to freedom as disengagement. This is my answer, by the way, to the question of what is kaivalya. I translated kaivalya as freedom as disengagement. Here the notion of Abhinivesha, I'm about to argue, can play an instrumental role. Abhinivesha, clinging to life. In Yoga Sutra 2.9, Patanjali writes that grasping onto life is a natural inclination rooted even in the wise. This is to say that wisdom or knowledge at the mental, chitta-vritti level can hardly cure one's fear of death. Vyasa verbalizes the immediacy of Abhinivesha as an instinct inherent in every living creature through the intimate proclamation, "Let me not be non-existent, let me exist. Let me not be non-existent, let me exist." This first-person formulation demonstrates the fact that Abhinivesha is not a theoretical postulation, but an existential conviction. This instinctive attachment to life, Vyasa surmises, can only be the result of the pain of death experience in previous lives. According to him, every living creature, even worms we saw above, has a latent memory, vasana, of previous deaths, and therefore passionately holds on to life. For Vyasa, then, Abhinivesha is about fearing death as a painful event, not death as an unknown, or void, or non-existence. Even the learned, Kushala, Vyasa agrees with Patanjali, is afraid of dying. According to the Bhashyakara, to the commentator to Vyasa, the learned is one who knows his previous births, an obtainable siddhi mentioned in Yoga Sutra 239 and 318. But this knowledge cannot disperse the fear at hand. The author of the Vivarana and Vijnana Bhikshu take this point further. According to them, to be learned is to understand that the Atman, one's core selfhood, is eternal. How can such a person, who knows that death is a matter of shedding a disposable body and a disposable persona, whereas one's essence remains untouched, be afraid of such a natural procedure? Vijnana Bhikshu writes that the learned person is someone who has overcome Avidya, which he interprets in its epistemological sense alone, as mita, raga, and vesha, but is still afflicted by Abhinivesha. Hence, according to him, Abhinivesha is the most difficult klesha to subdue. Knowledge of whatever kind, the commentators agree, is insufficient to overcome fear of death. A deeper meditative work is needed. In this respect, Patanjali speaks of, in Yoga Sutra 2.10.11, of Pratikvasava, which we just heard about, and dhyana. Now let's skip one paragraph. In this paragraph, I'm referring to the notion of ashish, which is another word for Abhinivesha in my reading. I'll come to my conclusion. In her paper, The Notion of Klesha and its bearing on the yoga analysis of mind, Amrita Balslev raises the question, why make a separate rubric for fear of death and not simply list it under Dvesha, marking death as the most undesirable? In brackets, let me say that the same question, why a separate rubric, can also be raised with regards to Vikalpa in the Chitta-vritti scheme in chapter 1 of the Yoga Sutra. Namely, why not list it under Viparyaya, marking language as infected by inherent opacity? The unique status of Vikalpa and Abhinivesha, each in its own distinct way, makes them the most interesting categories, philosophically speaking, in the parallel schemes of the fluctuations of the mind, the Chitta-vrittis, and the causes of affliction, the kleshas. As for Balslev's question about Abhinivesha, I want to suggest that it deserves a rubric of its own, because of its presence, not merely down under, in subterranean psychological karmic depth, but also on the surface. Unlike the other kleshas, which are transparent, like lenses through which one perceives, or in our case, shapes and molds his world, Abhinivesha, as fear of death, is tangibly felt. As such, the yogin can follow his fear to its psychological roots. In this respect, Abhinivesha can work as a doorway to a layer of being usually locked and unseen. The word unseen corresponds with the notion of adrishta, pertaining to unseen karma. Hence, the yogin's challenge is to transform Abhinivesha from an obstacle to an effective tool of self-analysis. Now the question is whether I have 5 more minutes or whether I'm already... 5 more minutes. So I want to close with something totally different. I want to close with an altogether different angle of death in Patanjali Yoga. In fact, I want to draw your attention, the great scholars' attention, to an interesting illustration which I found in Vijnana Bhikshu's commentary. Because, but it should interest the audience also because it's very practical, as you will see. Yoga Sutra 340 is dedicated to the yogin's work with the samana, one of the 5 principal values, inner winds or breaths, and its siddhi, merit or effect. Synoptic as ever Patanjali writes, samana jayaj jwalanam, or through control over the samana, the mid-breath, or the digestive breath, there is jwalana, lighting of fire. Vyasa adds that this happens through an upadmana, blowing of tejas, heat. It is further implied that the heat that is blown is the heat of the jatara agni, the stomach fire, that processes food. In his commentary of Yoga Sutra 339, the previous sutra, Vyasa speaks of samana as sama, poised, or equitable breath. The function of the samana is to equalize the food for assimilation. It is stationed, Vachaspati Mishra elucidates, in the same area as the Jatara Agni, namely in the navel region. What is generated through the conquest of samana, Patanjali continues to write in 340, is a kind of extraordinary glow around the body. This effect seems mainly physical, similar to the effect of remaining detached from water and thorns by conquering the udana, the up breath or speech breath, as expounded in Yoga Sutra 339. Vijnana Bhikshu, Patanjali's 16th century commentator, glosses the word upadmana, blowing, in Vyasa's commentary of Yoga Sutra 340 as suggesting, this is what I wanted to bring to your attention, that the yogin burns his own body like Sati. The body burns his own body like Sati. Mukund Lat, a Jaipur-based contemporary thinker, remarks that Vijnana Bhikshu seems to suggest a more transcendental effect of conquering the samana than Vyasa and Vachaspati Mishra. In speaking of the Sati, a widow who chooses to be burned alive in the same fire with her husband's dead body in his funeral. By reducing her physical body, this is a quote from Mukundji, by reducing her physical body to ashes, the Sati attains a non-physical, sukshma body that will enable her to go to heaven and be united with her dead husband. A Sati is one who has conquered herself like a yogin. Lark uses the notion of Sati in its general sense, which evokes the famous myth of Sati, Shiva's wife, who immolated herself, burning her body, quote, burning her body in the fire of her own power of yoga, as Wendy Doniger puts it. The story of Sati and her sacrifice occurs in the Shiva Purana and in numerous other texts. It is beyond my present scope and time to unpack Vijnana Bhikshu's illustration. In what sense does the yogin burn his body? What are the sacrificial overtones of Sati's famous act to be incorporated in the yogin's case? Are we to consider the procedure of yoga as one of self-sacrifice? And on the other hand, how does Patanjali's conquering the samana technique, expounded in Yoga Sutra 340, contribute to the reading and understanding of the myth or myths in the plural of Sati? So I'm ending with a question.
Thank you very much, Danny, for your wonderful presentation, really. And just I would like to follow your last reply for the audience. I mean, something about the power of question, the power of questioning. After that, you quoted Daya Krishna about the power and importance of that, and I'm sure you have thought about it, and it's a very interesting topic. I think the extent with questions rather than with answers, it's one thing. Another thing is just a general comment about the value of life, according to the Yoga Sutra. I mean, there are all sorts of readers of the Yoga Sutra. Some of them are more morbid than others. Krish is a counter-morbid reader. I am a morbid reader of the Yoga Sutra. And in my reading of the Yoga Sutra, I've always sensed that death is better than life. In a sense, and when I read, you quoted Patanjali is 215, which I've always thought much of it. And Vyasa says quite explicitly that I think Nan Pahatya Bhutani Bhoga Samhavati, something like that. I mean that the mere experience is impossible without hurting other creatures. And as I, a morbid reader of the Yoga Sutra, as I took it, it was just the saying that better not to live, because life itself, if Bhoga is being alive, life itself is blameworthy and not worthy of living. In a sense, this is my own reading, but I think I'm the only one in this in this audience to say that. But let's start with the question of questioning. I think it's for me it's a wonderful issue.
Thank you, Yochanan. Thank you, Yochanan, the morbid reader of the Yoga Sutra. You didn't exactly ask a question, but I have an answer to this question. For me, Patanjali or Vyasa, or Patanjali Vyasa, as Philip suggests, does not prefer death over life, but tries to reach a position which is beyond both. Something like that.
Hi. My question is, in the beginning you had referred to Kathaka Upanishad and conversation between Nachiketa and Yama. Did you go to the later parts of Kathaka Upanishad to understand the paper more with what was Yama's answer after Nachiketa refuses to take the bait? They go on for 2 more chapters and Yama was forced to tell his secrets. Did you find your answer there rather than coming to Yoga Sutra?
So you asked 2 questions. The first question is whether I read the remaining of the Kathaka Upanishad. The answer is yes. I read it and I was disappointed because I think that an explicit answer is not given. And then perhaps it alludes to the direction that an explicit answer cannot be given. The answer has to be carved from within. But on a personal note, I can tell you that when I corresponded with Chris, my grandmother passed away. And I thought that I would take the grief over her death as an excuse, as an occasion to think about death. So as I said, I'm not sure that I discovered something new about death, but at least we had a good trip through a good journey through the Yoga Sutra.
How much in each of the texts do you think death is referring to, and even the fear of death, actual death, or death of the ego as a concept, death of the attachments to life? Is it? Are we always speaking in the case of literal death of this life, or how much of the text goes into more of an idea of dissolving the ego, dissolving the attachments?
Thank you for the question. I think that everything, or almost everything, can be taken as a metaphor. But the problem is that there is something like death. Not just as a metaphor. And for me, I mean, my title was, I gave this huge title, Patanjali Yoga on Life and Death. So in my reading, Patanjali Yoga, Patanjali and the commentators, they're interested not only in the question of the ego, asmita, or whatever you call it, but also in the question of death. How do we cope with this, I don't know how to call it, it's not exactly a phenomenon, with this event, with this, I mean, Wittgenstein says that it's not an event, but it's something that I think has to be dealt with and usually is suppressed. This is why I emphasize the psychological dimension. So he's trying to deal with something which is usually suppressed.
Just take 2 more questions.
In that, just a quick note, in that Nachiketa's story, what I find inspirational actually is he goes to the gate of death and returns back from the mouth of death, Yama. And the whole objective of his knowledge, the ultimate knowledge, Brahma Vidya, Rahasya, Guhya, whatever it is just to go back and do his karma, actually. Just go back to parents and do his fire sacrifices, Nachiketa, Abhinives. So it is death which actually leads us to do actions, and maybe rightful actions.
Again, we can speak of, apropos the Kathaka Upanishad, as death as a philosophical opportunity to think anew about living.
So my question has to do with the specifics on this Vyasa saying that the fear of death has to do with it being a painful event. And in a Kabbalistic perspective, which you probably know more than I would, is specifically the pain of death is when you die, the belief that you review your life and look at all the things that perhaps you didn't complete when you were here and all. It's a burning shame. That concept of hell is actually that you burn in hell, is actually that it's a burning shame of not living up to your life's potential. And so I'm just curious from this perspective what you think the painful aspect is, specifically, what that means, pain.
I didn't quite understand the question. You're asking me what do I think about pain, or what do I think is pain of death according to Vyasa?
Yes, the latter.
I have no clue. And I'm saying it very honestly. I think that encountering the Yoga Sutra is encountering a different culture, encountering a foreign land. And when you encounter a foreign land, the easiest thing to do is to say, okay, I understand everything. I came to America 2 weeks ago, I understand America totally. I went to the supermarket and it's a microcosmos, etc. But it's not even to understand America is not easy. Not to mention other places like Israel. But I think that this openness and the fact that I don't have an answer to you is also significant.
Thank you, Daniel. In the interest of time,